I'm Neyran Turan
Mete Somnez.
from NEMESTUDIO.
When we saw the call for entries for the competition, we actually were working on two projects that were closely related to the theme. The projects were, the two projects, one of them 6 objects, 36 plants project, the other one is an installation we're working on right now called 9 Islands. They were looking at the idea of long span or longevity in the context of architecture. The first one, the 6 objects, 36 plans, has been looking at the idea of flexibility through notions of obsolescence, how one building adapts to change in its life cycle. And the second project, the 9 Islands, was looking at the idea of long span from a material point of view. If you look at a building, a material is extracted from its resource, from that moment, almost like buildings as a result of quarries, transported to suppliers, and in the end comes as a finished effect on a building, but then gets demolished, becomes a waste, and then also even gets decomposed. So that kind of span from a material point of view of a building is way, way longer than what we think about it. So we started to kind of almost think about these things. We have been thinking about the idea of permanence in that way, almost like elongated understanding of permanence in the context of architecture or buildings. So in the installation, what we've done is the installation is comprised of 7 models and 9 drawings. We approach the question of how does one represent a work? There are different formats for that. It could be a portfolio, a book, a lecture, but how does one represent a body of work in one drawing? So that was like the simple question we kind of tackled with. And the drawing, and the large drawing, is actually one drawing, but it's divided into different 9 sections, 9 frames, and combines all of our NEMESTUDIO's recent projects, 12 of our projects. So what it creates, first of all, is that this probably like a capriccio drawing. It's a very known kind of, it's a known precedent within architecture. It actually, on a fictional landscapes, a fictional territory, brings together our projects that are otherwise not together. For instance, projects like our LV house. We looked at some of the, let's say, discarded kind of studies we've done for that project, and they reappeared with the building itself, so that we'll see the house itself, and we have those family of objects next to it. So each project, when it lands to that territory, gains another relevance, a specificity, let's say, a resolution, another kind of resolution, just because it's on that drawing. If you look at the frames themselves, we were interested in that idea of the a kind of observer looking at this drawing and understanding it as one thing, but also being aware of the fact that these are separate instances. We actually shifted the perspectives of each frame very slightly. If you look closely, you realize that we used actually 3 kinds of oblique projections, plan obliques and elevation obliques, and that each frame slightly kind of shifts that perspective and kind of, let's say, reinforces that idea of separation slightly, yet you know that it's one drawing.
There's also 7 models in the work. It's basically a sort of our study models for our 6 objects projects. Sort of it appear in the drawings several times. The other thing I think for us is really important is that is the scale. So we operate at NEMESTUDIO from really small scales, installations, to all the way to territory scale, in between with buildings and houses. So we operate at all these different scales. So how one could bring all these different scales together was the challenge.
That in itself, I think, is a kind of, let's say, was the constraint of our installation drawing, in the sense that because of our interest in colliding these notions, automatically you will get moments of extremely small projects and houses or building scale projects, but also projects that are looking at larger geographies beyond the city. Our work looks at notions of extremely core notions of architecture, like form, representation, or materiality, and in a way is interested in colliding those notions unconventionally with concerns of environment or geography. That collision brings a kind of unbiased kind of approach to scale. The relationship between, I think, real and abstract is something that we are very much interested in. We sometimes call it as an interest in what we call a slightly unfamiliar kind of realism, in the sense that we're not so much interested in just the fictional, just the imaginary that has no relationship to the real, by real in this reality of the world. We are very much interested in the realities of architectures, in this case, engagement with reality. It could be climate change, it could be certain kind of things that are happening around us. And in that way, for us, when we say slightly unfamiliar, we're interested in abstracting things slightly to separate from it in order to engage with it more actually deeply. We have been interested in the notion of geography also from a kind of aesthetic point of view, saying that almost by colliding notions of monumentality, which brings legibility, with geography, that you again create a sort of a kind of engagement, like for the audience. It could be architecture and other disciplines.
Monumentality is an interesting subject where I think it just shows up in many of our projects, small or large, because monumental in the sort of sense of the word usually refers to sort of a large object. But in our case, sometimes it's actually the sort of duration also makes something monumental too. You know, just in the case of the sort of material like plastic, which becomes a monument of the future.
In relation to the theme of the program this year, I think monument is definitely a term that we associate with permanence. So I think that in our work, one definitely can say that we are trying to kind of understand these terms better in the context of architecture, question our assumptions of what they mean. Certain things that look like impermanent can actually be very permanent, like the plastic cup, or certain things that we associate with permanent, like fixed plans, or certain things that look like very inflexible, can actually be very flexible.